my mantra on addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. So addiction all of a sudden goes from this disease model to a response to human experience model. I've written 4 books, traveled internationally. Books have been published in close to 30 languages now. These days, I'm a teacher, a speaker, and a writer. I'm writing a couple of new books. So, but all on the subjects that enthused me or excited me as a physician: trauma, addiction, child development, human potential, stress, health, and the relationship of the individual to the communal, familial, and social environment. So really what I'm looking for is the unity of things and how the unity of everything shows up in health and illness. Let's just begin by saying that life affects human development.
Yep.
So whatever happens in life will have an effect on human development, and whether those things are good, whether those things are harmful, all that will have an effect, because we're creatures of the environment, and we're born with certain biological needs and psychological needs. In fact, you can't separate the two, because the emotional needs not being met has direct and definable and defined physiological effect on the brain and on the body. And this begins in utero. So already stresses on a pregnant woman will have an impact on the physiological stress reactivity of the infant. In fact, a study recently, within the last 2 weeks, showed that stress on the mother in pregnancy shows documentable effects on the infant's stress responsivity up to age 45. Which is when it was studied, and there's some gender differences on how prenatal stress affects the females and males. So it begins in uterus. So the more stressed women are, the more inflammation there might be in the child's body, the more the stress regulation mechanisms of the brain might be disturbed, metabolism is affected, and so on. And then this then goes on to childhood, infancy, and so you have a combination of physical effects, but you also, if you look at how the human brain develops, the most important determining influence on the actual development of the brain is the quality of emotional relationships. Article from Harvard, Center on the Developing Child, published in the journal Pediatrics in 2012, that says the architecture of the brain is constructed to an ongoing process that begins before birth, continues into adulthood, and establishes either a sturdy or a fragile foundation for all the health, learning, and behavior that follow. Not some of the health, learning, and behavior, all the health, learning, and behavior that follow. And, second sentence, the interactions of genes and experiences literally shapes the circuitry of the developing brain and is critically influenced by the mutual responsiveness of adult-child relationships, particularly in the early childhood years. So, under the circumstances of my own first year, when my mother was concerned with sheer survival, grieving the death of her parent, agonized over the absence and unknown fate of her husband, that she could not provide me with those playful, relaxed, stress-free interactions that I required for my healthy development. But you don't need that degree of stress. In modern society, a lot of parents are stressed in such a way that they can't be responsive to their child's needs, not because they don't love the child, just because they're too stressed, too depressed, haven't worked out their own traumas, too distracted. So that, again, I'm just emphasizing that You don't need the drama to create the trauma. Dissociation is an adaptation. When the stress is too much and one can't change the situation or escape from it, then one dissociates. Well, that's not a good thing, but it's a good thing in the short term, because otherwise the child's brain just couldn't endure the stress. That same dissociation then results later on in any set of mental health conditions, from ADHD, where tuning out is the hallmark of it, so that's what I've been diagnosed. We're at the extreme end of the scale with psychosis or dissociative disorders. Now, the working them through results in a lot of insight.
Mm-hmm.
The adaptation, or take an adaptation like, given my first year of life, I get the message that I'm not wanted, which is certainly the message that the world gave me. Well, then I might work very hard later on to make myself wanted.
Right.
So that makes me a really good physician. I work hard. I'm available to my clients, more than available, day or night. I work hard to ensure that they do well. All those are good things. But driving it to a certain degree, to a significant degree, is this desperation to be wanted and to be validated and to justify my existence, which the world denied that I had a right, and denied my right to when I was first in this universe. So that may seem like a good thing. Now, being a dedicated physician or whatever professional or pursuit that you have, that's a good thing. But if it's driven by an unconscious need, it's not a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, we can learn to work through those things. And I've gained a lot of insight and empathy and I dare say compassion through working through my own material. But it wasn't that the adaptation itself made me compassionate. Well, I don't know what to say. I'm not sure I'm being clear on this answer here to you, Joe, because it's true. From a very early age on, I was aware of pain in the world. And I was very aware that people have felt pain or were hurt who in no way deserved it. And the question, why are people hurting people, has always agitated me. Like, how could this have happened? What made human beings behave the way they did, and what makes them behave today the way they do? So those experiences certainly can excite those questions in someone's mind. As far as sensitivity is concerned, which you mentioned, by and large, I think that's the one thing that's genetic here. There are certain genes, and this is a big mistake that a lot of researchers make. They think people inherit mental diseases. No, they don't. There's no gene that codes for any mental illness. There's no set of genes that code for any mental illness. There's no set of genes without which you can't have a mental illness. There are a set of genes which, if you have them, you're more likely to have any number of mental health illnesses, non-specifically. Now, but will those same genes, given good circumstances, lead to increased creativity, leadership, spontaneity, aliveness? So what are the genes for? The genes are for sensitivity.
Yeah.
And the more sensitive people are, sincere meaning the Latin word sincere, to feel, the more they feel. That means when bad stuff happens, they feel that more, and their adaptations become more rigid. At the same time, when good things happen, it has a more positive effect on the sensitive person. So sensitivity itself is a neutral quality. Given the right environment, it's highly beneficial. Given the negative environment, it leads to more pain and more suffering. Mm-hmm. But it always makes for a more possibility of insight and empathy. The adaptation itself has a certain wisdom in it. See, trauma is not what happens to you. Like, we often think of trauma as a tsunami or as genocide or as child abuse. Those are traumatic, but they're not the trauma. The word trauma comes from a Greek word for wound. So trauma is the wound which you sustain. It's not what happened to you, it's what happened inside you. There's a wisdom in it. For example, let's say you have a 2-year-old child. and they throw a temper tantrum. And you follow Jordan Peterson's advice, which is to that a 2-year-old that an angry child should be made to sit by themselves. So you give the message that your anger is not acceptable. Now, what will a 2-year-old do if they continually get the message that their anger is not acceptable? What will they do with their anger?
They'll stuff it down as far as it can go.
Exactly, they will depress it. Now, that's a wise adaptation, because to express the anger is to threaten their relationship with the people that they rely on. So there's a wisdom in that adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first wisdom. Or my tuning out, believe me, there was a lot of wisdom in my tuning out in my first year of life. I could not have endured life if I hadn't tuned out a lot, I'm sure. So there's a wisdom in that. There's a wisdom in all these manifestations. So that's the first wisdom of trauma. The second wisdom of trauma is the one we've touched upon, which is that when you work it through, you learn so much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't recommend it as a way of learning. It just so happens. It's just so. I'm just writing it in this book I'm writing. I'm just talking about disease as a teacher. A lot of people, even with terminal disease, have told me that they wouldn't switch their disease for non-disease because of what they've learned. And I don't recommend that way of learning. I'm just telling you what people have told me.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of wisdom in learning from our traumas. There's a lot of wisdom in multiple ways. The medical model has addiction as a disease largely inherited, which is genetic nonsense. As I said earlier, there's no genes that code for addiction, nor are there genes that if you don't have them, you can't get addicted. So while there might be certain sensitivities which have to do with certain genetic predispositions to do with sensitivities, as I mentioned before, a predisposition is not the same as a predetermination. Mm-hmm. So to really understand what's going on in addiction, let's look at what an addiction is. So I define addiction as well, obviously it's a complex psychophysiological process, but it's manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in, and therefore craves, but suffers negative consequences as a result of, and has trouble giving up despite the negative consequences. So short-term relief, pleasure, craving; long-term harm, inability to give it up. So that by definition, then, we clearly get that addictions could be to substances, and they often are, from alcohol to cigarettes to the illicit substances like opiates and stimulants and so on. But they could also be to shopping, to eating, to work, to gambling, to sex, to pornography, to internet gaming, to the internet itself, to extreme sports, and so on, to any number of activities. And the issue is not the activity so much as the internal relationship to it. If it's characterized by craving, pleasure, short-term relief of some kind, negative consequences, and difficulty giving it up, you got an addiction. I don't care what the activity is. So, no, depending on whether we're going to play this game or not, I could ask you, according to that definition, and without asking you to be specific in any way, have you, yes or no, had any kind of an addictive pattern in your life? So rather than seeing the addiction as the primary problem, we could look at the issue of mental noise as a primary problem, and look at how it arose and what maybe can be done to quiet it in ways that don't have negative consequences. So addiction all of a sudden goes from this disease model to a response to human experience model, which means that treating it needs to take into account human experience and the traumatic imprint that human experience carries. So. What I'm actually saying, based on voluminous scientific evidence, let alone human insight, is that most chronic illness, whether physical so-called or mental so-called, is rooted in trauma. In fact, everything we call, the British psychologist Richard Bentall writes that the evidence relating psychosis, for example, to childhood adversity is stronger, or is about as strong at least, as the evidence linking cigarettes and lung cancer or lung disease. So it's not like we lack the evidence. So my knock on, now that's only when it comes to, say, mental illness, but all mental illnesses are response, in my view, and adaptive responses in some sense to, at least they begin that way, to childhood adversity and trauma, as are most chronic illnesses, as I show in my book, When the Body Says No. So Canadian study, men who are sexually abused, they have something like, and I'm trying to remember the study, do they have 50% more chance or double the risk of cancer as adults? Something like that. But certainly elevated risk of cancer. This is regardless of lifestyle factors, by the way, smoking or drinking. A study out of Harvard 2 years ago, women with post-traumatic stress disorder, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, double the risk of ovarian cancer. Now, if that was the only study ever done, and it isn't, and it's all been shown in animal models that stress and trauma increase the risk of ovarian cancer. But if that was the only study ever done, that should send every physician running to figure out what's the connection between emotions and malignancy. And this information has been coming in for decades and decades and decades. So whether you're talking about autoimmune disease or you're talking about malignancy, that has a huge traumatic imprint every time. Now, Western medicine separates the mind from the body. Oh, by the way, the ovarian study, the ovarian cancer study, the milder the symptoms of PTSD, the less is the likelihood of cancer. Which means that if we help people deal with their traumas, we could potentially prevent malignancy. Now, there's all kinds of physiological reasons for that are, and the physiological pathways have actually been worked out. None of this is a mystery. But for all that science, the average medical student never hears this stuff. They, at least until recently, it's changing a little bit. The average student does not get a single lecture on trauma. They should get a whole year-long course on trauma. They don't get a single lecture, except physical trauma, like, broken bones and so on. So the Western medicine separates the mind from the body, the emotions from the physiology, which scientifically is, what's the word, non-tenable. In real life, it doesn't exist. I mean, let me induce any emotion in you and see if it doesn't have a physiological correlate in your body right away. Whether you're happy, relaxed, or terrified or angry, they all have physiological imprints. They all involve your nervous system, your cardiovascular system, your gut, your immune system, your hormonal apparatus. It's all one system. Western medicine does not take that unity into account, either in its understanding of the etiology of illness, the causation of illness, and certainly not when it comes to the treatment of it. Number one, Western medicine separates the individual from the environment. For example, addiction is seen as an individual problem. It's not. It's a multi-generational family problem. It's also a social problem. If you look at today with the hollowing out of the industrial economy in the United States, under neoliberalism, the fraying of the social net, the social safety net, you get massive dislocation, massive despair, and you get massive increases in addiction. You can't separate the individual from the environment. That ovarian cancer PTSD study, nobody develops PTSD on their own. That happens in an environment. So that the cancer showing up in the individual female body is a manifestation of a social process. And so that's not understood. What's also not understood by Western medicine is the body's and the psyche's own healing capacity. So we're all about cure, if it's possible, or symptom suppression. If we're happening chronic mental health conditions and chronic autoimmune conditions, all we do is we suppress symptoms. But that the psyche or the soma, the soul or the body, has an innate healing capacity that can be encouraged and invited and supported. That's not considered in Western medical training or the Western medical ideology. So those are significant gaps which really limit as amazing as Western medicine can be, and one gasps at the miracles that they can perform. But at the same time, it's so much more limited than it could be. And the miracles are largely in the realm of acute conditions. We're really quite illiterate when it comes to the long-term chronic conditions of mind and the body. I've been involved with ayahuasca work for about 12 years now, even to the point where at some point I got a warning from Health Canada to cease and desist. Thank you, Health Canada. Which is interesting because by the time they sent me that notice, they had already acknowledged that ayahuasca was neither addictive nor harmful. And in fact, they had allowed it for religious purposes, just not for healing purposes. So we could talk about the illogicality of that. I wouldn't say that the way you framed the question, Joe, is that this has happened in Western medicine. It hasn't happened in Western medicine. It has happened largely outside Western medicine. So the recrudescence of the psychedelic research and interest has not been mainstream by any means. But certainly, precisely because of the failures of Western medicine that I've been mentioning, and especially in the mental health field, there's been real interest in, well, what else is out there? Resurgence of research, particularly the very detailed and extensive research now in the use of MDMA in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, if somebody told you 5 years ago, MDMA could prevent ovarian cancer, you think that'd be nuts.
Right.
But in fact, it makes perfect sense.
Right.
Because if it can heal PTSD, it can help you heal all kinds of diseases or prevent all kinds of diseases. So the studies have been in MDMA, studies with mushrooms now in end-of-life anxiety, but there's nothing specific about end-of-life anxiety. They just allowed those studies because those people were dying anyway. But mushrooms, I know, can help anxiety. They can potentially help stimulant addictions. They've been studied for that now. I've seen ayahuasca. People go through ayahuasca ceremonies and heal from addictions, from depressions, from anxiety, from compulsions, even from severe autoimmune disease. And none of that is miraculous if you actually get that you can't separate the mind from the body, the psyche from the soma, the unconscious, emotional dynamics from our physiology. When you get the unity of it all, then you can understand that anything that can powerfully work with the mind can have powerful impacts on people's mental states and people's physiological states. So that's what's happening now. Now it's being documented more and more. And again, because of the desperation with the failures of the mainstream model. Having said that, I'm not a psychedelic evangelist. I don't think they are the answer for a whole lot of reasons. One of them being is that most people will never have access to it. I mean, under the best conditions, I can't imagine how large numbers of people will be able to be trained enough to pursue these practices, or many people who can afford them. And at the same time, I also think that the sources of these problems are social and economic and political. So that any treatment process only deals with the outcomes, not with sources, in a certain sense. Having said that, given the limitations that we've been talking about, psychedelics are a potentially beautiful modality. Um, Sigmund Freud said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious, which is true because the dreams really reveal the unconscious if one knows how to interpret them and integrate one's interpretations. The problem is dreams are really hard to interpret. Freud himself, I think, was terrible at interpreting dreams. I mean, some of his interpretations are hair-raisingly arbitrary, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But he was certainly looking in the right direction of the how do we get at the unconscious? Well, the psychedelics are very immediate ways of consciously getting at the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the psychedelic experience, people are both conscious and they're having their unconscious run riot and reveal all its contents. What an amazing modality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the right hands. I'm completely optimistic about the human capacity to receive and to grow with reality.
Mm-hmm.
And this despite all kinds of social forces against it. In a society that largely denies human reality, and not only denies it, it assaults it. But so that my optimism has to do with what I believe about human beings. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Anne Frank, in the Diary of Anne Frank, a few months before she was taken to Bergen-Belsen to die, she wrote that basically that no matter what, she says, I believe that people are good at heart.
Hmm.
And she was one of these really sensitive souls.
Mm-hmm.
So in the middle of the greatest crime, arguably, that human beings have ever committed against one another, she said, I believe that people are basically good at heart. I believe, oh yeah, I totally believe that. I believe that when the goodness doesn't show up, it's because it's been squelched.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking about a Donald Trump or a Hitler or a Stalin, or to a lesser degree, any number of political leaders from George Bush to Stephen Harper to Justin Trudeau, I don't care. You're dealing with degrees of suppression of pain, which results in lack of empathy, in the extreme cases, tremendous cruelty. Hence, you have monstrous creatures like Stalin or Goering or Hitler. You know, I just in the chapter I just finished writing, I report the conversation I had with the grandniece of Hermann Goering, Bettina,
Mm-hmm.
who herself is a healer,
Mm-hmm.
and she's one of these empaths.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Goering was an opiate addict, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The Reichsmarschall was an opiate addict and a food addict.
Mm-hmm.
And Bettina talks about a healing experience where, being an empath, she entered into the psyche of her great uncle.
Mm-hmm.
She said it was monstrous and black.
Oh.
Well, of course it was. He was a highly traumatized man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if he hadn't been traumatized, he could have been a good man.
Here's the part that got really personal. Dr. Maté explains how everything, your brain, your emotional patterns, even how you handle stress, is shaped by what happens to you as a kid. Not just the big stuff like trauma, but even subtle things like if your parents were too stressed to give you the attention you needed. I started thinking about my own childhood and realized, wow, so much of who I am today, my anxiety, my tendency to overwork, makes sense when I look back. And what's crazy? This shaping starts before you're even born. If your mom was stressed during pregnancy, that could literally affect how you handle stress for the rest of your life. Like, how wild is that? This was the part that hit hardest for me. Dr. Maté says trauma isn't just the bad stuff that happens, it's the wound it leaves inside you. And yeah, those wounds suck, but they also shape how you survive. Maybe you learned to dissociate when things got tough, or maybe you became a perfectionist to feel wanted or loved. I could see myself in that so clearly. The kicker? These survival strategies, the ones that helped us as kids, don't always work as adults. But instead of beating ourselves up about them, we can start seeing the wisdom in why they're there and then figure out how to move forward. So, here's the takeaway. Addiction doesn't define you. It's not a flaw, and it's not who you are. It's a response to pain, to experiences that shaped you in ways you might not even realize yet. But here's the beautiful part. If pain is at the root, healing is the answer. You are not broken. You are not beyond repair. No matter where you are right now, there's hope. You have the power to understand your story, rewrite it, and move forward. The fact that you're still here, still searching, still trying, that's proof of your strength. Keep going. You're worth the effort, the growth, and the healing. The best version of yourself is still waiting for you, and it's never too late to find them. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Inside Serene, a channel dedicated to helping you navigate your healing journey. Together, we can break free from the chains of addiction, trauma, and chronic stress and embrace a brighter future.